are the Lit Ladies.
I'm Christy.
I'm Kelly.
And I'm Carissa.
Three writers and moms exploring how to live out our faith in our literary lives.
We span the country from the coasts to the Midwest, and with different stages of life, careers, and favorite genres, we're sure to cover the literary landscape.
In every episode, we'll discuss books we love, reading life, and writing craft, using the Bible as our guide for beauty, goodness, and truth. New episodes drop every other Friday.
And welcome to the Lit Ladies podcast. This is our very first episode. We are so excited to have you all join us, and we thought we would take a couple minutes to introduce ourselves. So we will start with Carissa.
I'm Carissa Riffle. I'm a writer, an English teacher, a wife, and a mom to a spunky toddler. I live in Kansas, but my heart is in Scotland, where I wander the antique bookstores. I write haunting magical realism and grounded fantasy with a shiver of horror and a splash of romance. I also write about art and faith on my Substack, Midnight Ink,
which will be in the show notes below for any of you who want to check that out. All right, Christy, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm a wife, a mom. I say a mom to four because I have 2 kids and 2 dogs. During the day, I'm a pediatric speech language pathologist, so talking is all day long for me. I do most of my reading and writing on nights and on the weekends. I read a wide variety, mainstream Christian, YA, and everything. I write romantic suspense, mostly set in the Carolina coast where I live.
All right. As you can see, we're all very different. My name is Kelly Borjas. I am wife to Joseph and mom to 3 boys. I basically live in a frat house. I have a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an almost 11-year-old. So I say I'm the queen of my own castle. So I grew up in Colorado. I have spent more time living in California. However, my formative years were spent in Colorado. So I'll always claim Colorado as home. I write romantic suspense filled with romance, adventure, and suspense, generally set in the mountains of Colorado. So that's our quick introduction. We have what I think is a fascinating connection. We've all been friends for a long time now, and Christy is going to explain how we all know each other.
We all met in the ACFW critique group. They have a big, giant critique group, and Kelly and I were subbing around the same time.
Wait, for those of our listeners who don't know, what's ACFW and what's subbing and what are critiques?
American Christian Fiction Writing. It's an organization where Christian writers can go and learn how to write and connect with other writers and all that good stuff. Subbing is when you submit something that you've written for somebody else to edit and kind of get feedback on it to make your writing better. So that's how we all met. And then we segued off into a smaller group. I don't even know how many members we have now, maybe 8. We've been doing this together for close to 8 years. We all kind of write something a little different, so it really helps when someone critiques and we get different angles and different perspectives on our writing.
Yes, I love how we all connected, and we actually live all across the country, so that's part of our trailer, but we live in different states, and some of us have met in person, some have not, but we have done monthly Zoom meetings, and some people do weekly calls, and we've had a lot of manuscripts that we've gone through for each other. And in the midst of that, there's a lot of life that occurs. So one of our goals with this podcast is to talk through our reading and how it applies to our life and why we read and why we love fiction. So those are just some of the topical elements that we'll cover. And we are going to start with why we each read fiction. We love fiction, but we all have different reasons for that. So Christy, go ahead and tell everyone why you read fiction.
From early age, I've always been a reader. I watch movies because my husband loves to watch TV and movies, but half the time I'm narrating what's happening on the screen in my head. And as I said before, I read all different kinds of books. I'm a little sparse with emotionally heavy books. I can only take a couple of those. I read chapter books to my kids just to help them with the joy of reading. And for me, it's more about entertainment, but I also enjoy learning through books because Jesus taught through parables. I think it's a good way to illustrate and help the ideas stick.
And how about you, Carissa? Why do you read fiction?
I've always loved reading just ever since I was a kid, pretty much ever since I could, decode the letters. I think I just liked the puzzle of that. And then I it kind of as an escape. I think that's how it kind of started. But it was more of like an escape thing instead of an escape from something, if that makes sense. Like it was more about what I was escaping to. Just it's like my ticket to another world. I loved reading fantasy. But now I feel like I read fiction for the same reason, like more in a more complex way, I guess. I just think more deeply about what I read. I really love this quote by C.S. Lewis where he talks about how reading helps him see through myriad eyes, which is like 1,000 eyes, many eyes. He says, in reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. I transcend myself and I am never more myself than when I do. See other perspectives and think about things you never would have thought about. Almost like, I hate to say like learn lessons. I don't really think that's the main reason that we read. I think it's just one aspect of literature. I think that comes from it, that you just kind of learn more perspectives and learn more about yourself in a way that you would never get just from like reading a nonfiction book about the same thing. You have to hear it in a story for it to go from your brain to your heart.
Okay, so Chris is a tough act to follow, and I'll be honest, my immediate response is I read for totally different reasons, but Christy and I were chatting about this earlier. That's one of the benefits of having friends who read different genres and have different backgrounds in reading. I read a lot of happy books, and I read them primarily for an escape. I love what Chris has said, not from my life, but just to something different. As a mom of 3 boys and a small business owner and constantly busy, I just love that point in the day where I can settle down and read. And typically I find that I want the feel-good endorphins or emotions or dopamine or whatever that physiological chemistry is that comes along with reading. I just really enjoy the escape. I love well-developed characters. I love a good love story, and I love when suspense drives a plot forward. And I especially love reading a book, like a book club book, and discussing that. So somewhere down the line, I would love to do that in this format. And hopefully we have listeners who read for all different sorts of reasons. And what bonds us is our love for reading.
Yeah. And also I think like I read different books for different reasons. Like when I read a Ruth Ware book or a Simone St. James book, it's for a completely different reason. You know, it's like suspenseful and mystery. That's a completely different reason that I'm reading than if I were to read, you know, like Jane Eyre. Like in a way, it's also an escape because I love the story, but I just know that I'm going to find different things in that.
So. I think that's a great point. And on that topic, tell us some of your favorite books or stories of all time, or which ones have molded you. How about you, Carissa?
Yeah. So like I said, I've basically been reading ever since I could string letters together. And there's this famous story about apparently I held up my entire second grade class from eating cupcakes because I was reading a book and it was my birthday party. I had to eat the first cupcake, and they were having to wait for me to finish reading my book.
Do you remember what book it was?
No, it was just some picture book.
Okay.
Yeah. But I remember it. Yeah. So, and then after that, I pretty much fell in love with fantasy right away. Like I remember very clearly reading this old beat up copy of The Hobbit in 3rd grade. And that brought me to the Chronicles of Narnia, which brought me to the Lord of the Rings in 5th grade. It was a good 3 years. But I read everything, just whatever you put in front of me with words on it. But so in 7th grade, my English teacher handed me Jane Eyre, which I've already mentioned. And that is one of my favorite books of all time. I just love the unconventional heroine. And it was kind of like it's got romance and it's whimsical, but at the same time, it's got this like melancholy and darkness. And I think that's just something I carry through all of my loves of reading and writing. And then my freshman English teacher, she really made me fall in love with literature because I didn't know there's so much meaning and so many layers could be in a book. So then I actually did not major in English in college. So I feel like I've been slowly catching up on the classics that I've missed out on. And so for a while, I kind of read a lot of classics and maybe more like literary bending books. But then I realized some of them I was reading and I didn't like love it. I was like making myself read them. And I was like, okay, I just need to read what I want to read. Like life is too short to be making yourself read, right? And like in a sense, you do want to read hard things and challenge yourself. But so then I kind of went back to my love of fantasy, and I've been craving more kind of darker, spookier flavor to my fantasy, like with writers like V.E. Schwab and Neil Gaiman. But still, I kind of will dabble in any genre, basically.
So what was your college major?
Intercultural studies.
Intercultural
kind of
studies.
Like missions, Christian ministry. And then I minored in teaching English as a second language.
Okay.
So then I went back and got a teaching degree and took some extra classes to teach.
And you teach English now, right?
I do, yeah.
So Chris is our resident scholar, which is very helpful for all of us. All right, Christy, what do you like to read?
Growing up, and I read Marguerite Henry books and The Black Stallion. I read everything horse, and I remember every Christmas asking Santa for a horse, and we had the yard, we had everything. Did I ever get one? No. I get it now. Dogs are a lot of work. I'm sure horses are even more work. But I never really read Christian. I don't think I even knew it existed. And then I was at work, and I was at a church seeing a kid at a preschool, and I was wandering around, and they had a church library. And I was like, what is this? My church never had a library growing up, so I didn't even know that existed. And I came across a D. Henderson book, and I was like, oh, can I borrow this? And they were like, yeah. So I read it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love it. And so I read all of her books. I think it was like the O'Malley series. And then that kind of led me into Dana Petrie. And so I read that whole Alaskan series. And then from then like I said, I still read a lot of mainstream, but I was hooked on the Christian market and the romantic suspense especially.
That's a good answer. I wanted a horse when I was younger too. And my dad told me when I was 40, he would buy me a horse. And he promised me he would buy me a horse when I'm 40. And I'm turning 40 this year. So I could probably go collecting. And I told my kids, and they're like, are you going to get the horse? But now I'm like, I don't have anywhere to put it, and I don't have the money. I grew up reading the Boxcar Children and Nancy Drew, and then I moved on to the Hardy Boys. And I was that kid that would stay up late with a flashlight under my covers because I had to finish a book. So those were the books I first started reading. And then when I was in 7th grade, my teacher handed me my first Jeanette Oak book, and that was my first exposure to Christian fiction. And from then on, I read all of the Christian fiction that I could find. I remember going to my church library and seeing what was in there. And then I would also go to the public library and just scan all of the spines of books and then take home a whole stack of them and read them so quickly. I actually had a break from reading in my early adult years, early 20s. I was working and, out with friends a lot. Then I got married, and it wasn't until I had my first baby that I had a whole lot more time alone and kind of quiet time. And I started voraciously reading again at that time. I read a bunch of different Christian fiction in that year or two period. And then I actually had a miscarriage. And in that miscarriage time frame, I picked up Dana Petrie's Alaskan Courage series. And that just ignited my love for romantic suspense and romantic suspense that's done well.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting in all of our stories is how someone gave us books. Like at least with Chris and I, it was a teacher who started that love for reading, and it really is in that middle school time frame. One of the things I want to do at some point is talk about good middle grade reads for all of the parents out there who are looking for good reads for their kids. Yeah, it's
different. The market's changed a lot, especially
right.
The YA.
Yeah, and if you have kids who are readers, you want them to read good content. So I would love to do some research. I know. It drives me crazy. Okay.
I think you made a great point, Kelly. Like, I think teachers are so important. It's one of the reasons I became a teacher is that I take great pride in picking out the perfect book for the student, what I think is the perfect book for that student. And so I think that's so great.
I just love it. I mean, here we are 30 years later, or maybe 20 in your case, Krista, but here we are so many years later, still remembering those books that our teachers gave us. And that's for not only a love for reading, but also for writing. So that's really cool.
Shout out to you, Miss Smith, if you're listening.
Miss Smith. I hope Miss Smith listens.
And Mrs. Green. Miss Green.
Look, that would be amazing if they are. So tell us about your reading life. When do you read? What do you read? Do you split genres? Do you read nonfiction? Everyone has a different reading life, which is kind of fun to hear about too. Christy, you want to start us off?
I usually read whenever I have the time, but I'm pretty good about once I'm in a book, if it's good. Once I'm in a book, I usually finish it in a day, 2 tops. And then it's like I take a couple days, or if I'm writing, a little bit longer, and then I'll jump into the next book. But usually I'm a pretty fast reader, or maybe I just block everybody out. It's one of the two. And my kids are older. My kids are 14 and 11, so they can kind of entertain themselves. Like, we can read. And my son is as big a reader as I am. So he's actually in Battle of the Books in middle school. So he's reading all those books, like just zipping through them. I prefer fiction. I'll read just about anything except probably sci-fi. And I'm not a fan of like political thrillers. But most everything else I'll read. I love horror, especially as Halloween draws closer. I'll read it any time of year, but usually during the fall is when I'm more in the mood for it. I love reading mysteries, romance. I read contemporary and historical. Unlike Carissa, I usually only have one book going at a time. If I read nonfiction, I might read, is it Lars Erickson? Is that his name? I might read him because he does a pretty good job of making it like story-ish. But I'll read, as far as historical, I love anything associated with World War II. I'm just fascinated by like all the good stories that came out of such a terrible time. Anything with the Titanic. Love it.
I didn't know that.
Just the history stuff is just very interesting to me. So I have lots of picture books and books, all sorts of that on my shelf. So that's typically what I read.
And do you have a large Lego recreation of the Titanic, or am I imagining that?
I do.
I thought
I'll have to post that.
Yeah.
Well, I have a newsletter. So usually the newsletter, I'll post like one creative outlet other than like reading and writing, and I'll post one of my Lego sets. So that thing is huge. So yes, I do have that.
I didn't realize it was an obsession about the Titanic, but I did know that you had the Lego piece together. What about you, Carissa? Tell us a little more about what you like to read. Your reading life, so to speak.
Yeah, so I mostly read in little snatches before bed. I like to read on road trips. I have some more time. I'll read on the Kindle app on my phone. If I have an ebook that I'm really into, sometimes I'll just do that instead of scrolling social media, which I try to do that more and more. Like if I'm just waiting, I'll just read. And if I get lucky, or if I'm not writing, I spend a couple hours during my daughter's nap time. If I don't have other stuff to do, just reading. And sometimes I actually make myself do that instead of writing, just to kind of like fill the creative well, and just like, it's just good to escape for a little bit, for a longer period of time than just a couple minutes. But so normally I have a nonfiction book going, a fiction book, and an audiobook as well, which is usually fiction. So as the mom of a toddler, audiobooks are the go-to for me. I probably read 2 to 3 audiobooks for every one physical book. But I love it when I start to try to find more chores to do around the house, because my audiobook is so good that I just need to keep listening. So that is an upside. It's like a double,
Yeah, you're so productive if you have your audiobook.
Yeah, multitasking. Yeah. But mostly, like kind of talked about what I read. Lots of anything with like a speculative element. I'm definitely willing to try
into that. And I'm almost the opposite, where I will take fantasy books. I don't mind those, but if something is too, like I have to suspend my disbelief too much, then I don't jump into that. Go figure, right? Even though most books are suspending disbelief. I read at night after my kids go to bed. I get to that point 8 in the night, and it's been a long day, and I finally unwind. My brain is fried by that point of the day. So I do read at that point of the day. Generally, I read a fair amount of, romance, rom-com, romantic suspense. I also love some historical fiction and sometimes fantasy. depending on my mood. I've become more willing to be a mood reader in recent years. I think I used to feel like, oh, I have this book, I need to finish it. And now I'm learning, if I'm feeling like a romance book, I'll read a romance book. But if I feel like I want to like have a completely different experience, I'll read a fantasy book. So I'm much more willing to do that. And the other thing I'm more willing to do now is not finish a book. I used to feel like I had to finish a book if I started it. And now I feel like time is so valuable. I'll finish a book if I really want to finish a book. Yeah, it's something I've like seen a fair amount on in the book world, and I've come to that realization. I have gone through phases where I read a lot of nonfiction. And then when I started writing more seriously, I started using my early morning time to write and my child's nap time to write. So I tend to try and at least start my day reading my Bible. Not every day is that successful, but that is like my ultimate goal before I hit the writing and reading. So that's kind of the structure that I take. But if I read nonfiction, I love John Piper. He's one of my favorites.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I didn't say that, but I'm a mood reader as well. I will meticulously make a TBR, my list. Okay, this is the order I'm going to read it in. And then they're books that I really want to read. But then all of a sudden I'll just see another book and I'll be like, yep, that's the one. It's almost like you believe it's destiny. Like that's the one you have to read at the right time. So
do you think that's a little bit of a newer idea? I don't remember thinking about being a mood reader up until recently.
I don't know. I think it's something we've come up with a label for. You know, like I don't think that term has been around.
True.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I do think with the accessibility of ebooks now, we have so many more options than we used to have.
Yeah.
So it used to be go to the library or buy your books and you just had the books that you had. So you didn't necessarily have as many options. Now I feel like you can kind of pick a book for any type of book, topic, genre you want to pick. So maybe that's how it's changed the landscape a little bit.
I think on my Kindle, I have like 75 books in my unread side. So yeah, I mean, it is a mood. I just look on there. Well, because I'll get them, on sale or whatever, or when they come out and I'll put them on there and then I don't forget about them, but I'm reading something else. And then I'll be at the doctor's office or whatever and be like, what can I read? And I'll just kind of be like, oh, I feel like a romance or, oh, I feel like this. And, then just start reading it. So I have my own library on my Kindle that I can pick from.
But you actually go to your library in your Kindle and you look through all your options? Because sometimes I'll download something and forget it's there.
Yes, but I spent a lot of time one time going through my Kindle and putting in like categories, like this is read, this is unread, this is that. And then it didn't translate to whatever else I was reading, iPad or whatever, when I pulled up the Kindle app, and I was like, oh, just wasted all that time. Usually the ones I haven't read will be, the first 30 books or whatever, and I'll just kind of look through those. But and then sometimes it's like it'll be first in a series, and I've been really hesitant about starting series lately because I feel like I don't have the time for just like one set of series. Like I want to read a variety of books, and so I'm kind of been hesitant about starting series lately.
I love a good series. It just gets you into it. We did not pre-discuss this, but now that we're here, I am curious, and I would love to do a poll for any of our listeners. Do you read more on physical books or on your Kindle app? We know that Carissa does audiobooks, but what about between Kindle, ebook, whatever your ebook format would be, and physical book?
I would say it's hard because my library, most of the Christian books they have there, if they have Christian books, are like large print. So it's a big book. And the purse I carry is pretty tiny. So it's easier for me if I'm going somewhere just to throw my phone in my bag, because obviously my phone's going wherever I go, and I'll read it from there instead of like lugging a book around with me. If I'm on a road trip or something and I have a book, I'm always happier to read a printed book. But just for convenience sake, I think I probably do read more Kindles. And the ebook is cheaper than always buying a print book.
It's true.
And I like to support authors. So I borrow from the library, but I try and buy a lot of them. And the Kindle, I have no room. Like I'm running out of bookshelves at the house. So it's easier just to put it on my phone or iPad for the Kindle app.
What about you, Carissa?
Well, I kind of go through phases maybe. I prefer physical books, but just like convenience wise, ebooks are just so much easier. I did just get a new Kindle for my birthday, and so that helps because it doesn't take 2 seconds to turn every page for it to load. But like the light at night, so I can read at night in the dark, like it's just so convenient. And just for trips and like having that whole list of books on there is like a safety blanket for me. It's like I always have a whole stack of books everywhere I go.
I'm the same. And you can tell we are all readers because it's almost like an obsession. I'm the same with my Kindle. Before I go somewhere, I load it and make sure I have multiple options if I don't have Wi-Fi. But I also read more on my ebook now than I do physical books for all the same reasons. It's cheaper, it takes less room, and it's easier to get. All right. And our last topic, we are all readers and we're writers. So we'll tell you a little bit about our writing journeys and where we are in case you all want to follow those as well. Okay, Christy, tell us about your writing journey.
I never really thought about writing. I think it was my last year of college, like 2005. Oh, so long ago. And my first story was this terrible cliche romance, but it was a mystery in it too. So maybe it was a sign of things I was going to write in the future, but it was your super cliche, like rich man needs a nanny for his kid, that kind of thing. I mean, you already know this.
Yeah, but I'd read it anyway, I think.
No. I would never let anyone read this story. Oh my gosh, I will burn it. But normally I would read a book or see a movie and be like, I could do that, but what if I did it this way or that way, like a little different? And I just kind of considered it a hobby, and I was very inconsistent. Like I really didn't write that much, or I just kind of wrote for my own entertainment. And I was reading a blog somewhere and it had mentioned ACFW, and I was like, what is this? And so that's how I kind of got into that, because I'd never heard of it. So I joined, and then I entered not that story, but a different story I wrote. In their Genesis contest, which is like the first 15 pages of your manuscript, I think. And unfortunately, I was totally thinking that I was going to win. I was going to get a book deal. I was going to be like $1 billion bookseller. And it came back and it was bleeding in red. Like it was terrible. And someone had said, hey, you should join the Scribes critique group. And I was like, okay. And obviously it worked because I met you guys, and my writing has definitely come a long way since then. But from there, I kept learning, I kept writing, I kept reading. Now I've got some proposals that I'm working on to send out, and we will just see where that goes.
All right. I actually had a similar experience with Genesis, which I'll get to. I actually started writing a story in high school about, of course, a high school girl who met a boy in the parking lot at school, and I couldn't figure out the mechanics of writing, so I didn't finish it. And for a long time, I didn't think about writing fiction again. However, I used to write for my high school newspaper, and then I've always journaled. I've always loved writing. I did a foray into blogs, and I did some writing church blogs for my church for a while. So I have always loved to put words on paper because I process well that way. And when my baby was 18 months old, my first one, who's almost 11 now, my husband was studying for a bar exam, and I was home for hours and hours and hours by myself, and I needed to use my brain. And I remember reading a book. I don't remember what book it was, but I remember thinking, I could do this. So I told my husband, and I started it, and I had no idea what I was doing. I would, at the time, just go look at authors who I admired and then see if they had articles for writers and try and incorporate some of those best practices. And then I also thought it was great. And I also submitted it to Genesis, and I got the most terrible feedback ever. And it crushed me. So I also started getting my work critiqued. And this was a long time ago. We're talking 8 years ago. And that story has been written and rewritten so many times. And then it did eventually semifinal in the Genesis contest. And then I wrote a sequel to that book, and it finaled in that contest. And then the third book won that contest. So eventually, I guess I learned some things, but it took a long time. And I don't feel like people talk about how long that journey is for some of us. It's a long.
I think it's important.
It is. It's a long process. It's not. Even if you can kind of understand a story in your mind, getting it out on paper and then having all of the correct writing rules attached is very difficult. So I signed with a literary agent this year. I'm thrilled about that. Her name is Lynette Eason. And if you read Romantic Suspense, her name, she's fabulous. And we have proposals out to publishers. And at this point, I am just praying for the right home at the right time for my work. That's where it lands. Carissa, go for it.
I've been writing for a long time, basically probably since I could read. So I wrote my very first novel in 5th grade, and it was completely terrible. It was basically a combination of Narnia and Lord of the Rings. Yeah, it was not very good, but it was the first thing I'd ever written, and I like typed it out very carefully, and I had it in a folder, and my teacher was really excited about it. But then after that, I would just keep these composition notebooks, those like really cheap ones, but they would come in these cool covers. And so like each one had a different story in it, and I would just like carry them around everywhere I went and like add to them. And for a while, my friends were kind of into writing too. And so we'd like swap notebooks and like comment on each other's. So then I went to college, and it just kind of like college just took a lot of time and energy. But I felt like I returned every summer. I had a little bit more time. And so I would return to my old fantasy project that I'd been working on in high school. I would just return to it. It felt like an old friend. I took a creative writing workshop my senior year of college, and I realized that I was like, this is the happiest I have ever been in a class. And I loved college, but this was my favorite. So then after college, I immediately just started writing again, just for fun. And I like completely pantsed it, which means just I started a book. I had no idea where it was going to go, and I just kept going. It was very weird. And then I read this article by an author named Rainbow Rowell. And it kind of inspired me. I realized if I really wanted to do this and like actually get better and complete something I was proud of, it was going to take some time and discipline. So I did what this author suggested, which is completely cut out TV, writing every day. She could have just told her own story. She's like, I just decided I needed to do it. I would like, not have as many hobbies, like cutting out TV and just focus on it. So I did that. And then that was several years ago. And I felt like I got kind of frustrated with all the novels that I would write, but I couldn't finish, or couldn't quite get the way that I wanted. But looking back, when I think about it now, it was a really growing time for me in my writing. And I like to tell my students about this too, because we talk about failure and like how quantity leads to quality. It was like hundreds of thousands of words that no one is ever going to read. Hopefully no one will ever read them. But I really experimented. I tried a whole bunch of different genres. I tried dystopian and like contemporary romance, all these different genres. I did different point of views. And I think that really helped me find my voice. So I experimented a lot, and I had fun with it. Probably put way too much pressure on myself, I think, looking back. But I should have had more fun. But I tried multiple genres. And after that, I've sort of settled on fantasy with a sort of gothic or spooky undertone is the best way I can describe it. But a lot of my most recent and current and future projects are still all kind of a little bit different. Some of them a little bit gothic, some of them a little bit mystery. I do love a good mystery kind of structure. A little bit of magical realism. A lot of my short stories are more magical realism, which is more grounded in reality, but it has sort of just a one unexplained kind of speculative element, or element that's like magical, that's kind of not real. I also love to have a good romance plot in there somewhere. Gotta have that. The characters are just so good. And so I'm currently querying one novel, so sending out proposals to agents, and I'm revising another one.
And to clarify, you do not write young adult, you write fantasy.
Yeah, I have one young adult novel. Everything after that, I'm just kind of considering adult. It could be crossover, which is kind of like both markets could read it.
Sure.
But the characters are a little bit older.
And I actually think at least based on my reading experiences as a young adult, I was reading, adult fiction. So
I kind of was too, like thinking back. I probably should have said this, but like Frank Peretti, Ted Dekker were like huge inspirations for me and influences. But like I read mostly just their adult books.
Right. And if you're in the, Christian clean fiction space, it doesn't really matter if younger kids, younger adults, whatever, read these books because the content is clean or safe for them.
Well, some of them was more intense, like The Oath.
Oh, okay.
But I was old enough. I mean, I was in high school.
I remember those books. Yeah. Quick question for each of you. What is a book you are looking forward to reading next?
I mean, obviously I have so many in my TBR pile on my Kindle, so I'm looking forward to all of those. Jamie Jo Wright's book, Spectres in the Glass House, is coming out this fall. Pre-ordered that one. And then I just bought one today. Melissa Coslin, I like her writing, and her book is The Lost Library. So anything that's like library, I think it's almost Beauty and the Beast-ish, but not quite. But I think it may have a little nod to that. It's about a reclusive billionaire who helps somebody. So,
I think I saw that
there's
cover.
a library involved. Yes. So anything like that, like I'm into, especially like fairy tale rewrites, twists. I like a lot of those too. Chris and I have a lot of reading in common.
And how about you, Chris? What are you?
A lot. I am looking forward to reading. I think it comes out not next week, maybe, but the week after. It is The 13th Child by Erin A. Craig. And she writes, I think she'd probably be a similar genre to what I write, like fantasy, but kind of like a gothic, spooky sort of undertone. And this one, and a lot of, she says that all of hers so far are based on a Grimm's fairy tale. Some of them are lesser known fairy tales, which I think is really interesting.
It is. Okay. And I am looking forward to, I actually don't know when it comes out, but Danny Petrie's newest book in the Jeopardy Falls series. I love her. It's set in the Southwest, which is close to where I grew up. So I loved that. Okay. So we will end with a quote by C.S. Lewis, who Carissa mentioned earlier. You can never get a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me. And we are so glad you joined us today for our Lit Ladies podcast, and we hope to have you join us next time.